This beggar girl, 4 years old, cries for help after being hung from a bridge until a millionaire saw everything and did something incredible. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The scream cut through the morning air of Phoenix, Arizona, like a sharp blade, echoing through the still empty streets of an ordinary Monday. Richard Caldwell adjusted the rearview mirror of his black sedan as he headed towards his first pharmacy, as he had done every morning for 15 years. At 52, his routines were sacred. Coffee at 6, shower at 6:15, leaving the house at 7 sharp. The life of a methodical man who had built a pharmaceutical empire in the Arizona desert allowed for no surprises or deviations. The sound came again, louder this time. It was a child's cry, desperate, filled with pure terror. Richard frowned and slowed down as he approached the Green River Bridge, the only crossing over the small creek that cut through the city. His eyes, accustomed to seeing only numbers and spreadsheets, took a few seconds to process the scene unfolding before him. A girl was hanging from the guardrail of the bridge. Her small hands, white with effort, clung to the iron bars, while her feet dangled in the void. 50 feet below, the murky waters of the creek flowed lazily, indifferent to the drama unfolding above. Richard slammed on the brakes, making the car screech on the asphalt. His heart, which for years had beat to the monotonous rhythm of business, pounded like a runaway drum. For a moment he stood paralyzed, watching the child through the windshield. It was a little girl, no more than 6 years old, wearing a torn and dirty blue dress. "Help!" she screamed again, her voice breaking with fear and exhaustion. Something inside Richard snapped. He abandoned the car in the middle of the street, leaving the door open and the engine running, and ran towards the bridge. His Italian leather shoes slipped on the pavement, wet from the early morning dew, but he didn't slow down. With each step, he saw the little girl's hands slipping further from the railing. "Hold on!" he shouted, reaching out his arms. "I'm going to get you!" When he arrived at the scene, he could see the child's eyes, big, brown, filled with tears and a fear that no child should know. Richard leaned on the railing and reached out to her. The girl was inches from his fingers when her hands finally gave way. For a fraction of a second that seemed to last an eternity, she fell. Richard lunged forward, feeling the metal of the railing cut into his stomach, and managed to grab the girl's wrist at the last moment. The child's weight pulled at his shoulders, but he held on tight, fighting the pain that shot through his arms. "It's okay," he murmured, slowly pulling her up. "It's okay now." When he finally managed to lift her and put her safely on the bridge, Richard collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. The girl huddled against the railing, trembling violently. Her brown hair was disheveled, sticking to her face, wet with tears. The blue dress was torn in several places, revealing thin arms covered in small bruises. "What's your name?" Richard asked, trying to control his breathing. "Isabel," she whispered, wiping her nose with her small fist. "Isabel, what were you doing here? How did you get into this situation?" The girl looked at him with those huge eyes, filled with a sadness that seemed too old for her age. "Aunt Valerie put me here," she said, her voice so low that Richard had to lean in to hear. "She said if I didn't bring enough money yesterday, she'd teach me a lesson." Richard felt his stomach churn. "What aunt? Where is she?" "She left. Said she'd only come back if I was still here." Isabel started crying again. "I tried to hold on, but my hands were hurting so much." The businessman looked around. The bridge was completely deserted, as always at that time of the morning. The city of Phoenix still slumbered, unaware that a tragedy had almost happened there. Richard observed the girl again, her thin arms, the dirty dress, the way she cringed when he moved too quickly. It wasn't hard to imagine what else happened to that child. "Isabel," he said softly, "do you have anywhere to stay? Do you have a family?" She shook her head. "Just Aunt Valerie. My parents are gone." Richard closed his eyes for a moment. In 5 decades of life, he had always solved problems with planning, money, and contracts. He had never been emotionally involved with anything other than his business. Since losing his wife, Amelia, 5 years ago, he had built even higher walls around his heart. But looking at that girl, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a protective urge that went beyond reason. "Come with me," he said, holding out his hand. "Let's get out of here." Isabel hesitated, looking at Richard's large, strong hand. Her fingers were cold and trembled slightly. He helped her to her feet and led her to the car, noticing how she limped slightly on her right leg. As he drove towards his house in the upscale neighborhood of Paradise Valley, Richard looked at Isabel in the rearview mirror. The girl was huddled in the back seat, watching everything with curiosity mixed with fear. He had never taken a child home. In fact, he had avoided any contact with children for years, as they stirred painful memories of the family he had never managed to form with Amelia. "Mister," Isabel said suddenly, "is your house far away?" "Not too far," he replied, noticing how the term "Mister" affected him. "And there's someone there who will take good care of you." Maria was in the garden watering the flowers when Richard's car stopped in the driveway. The 58-year-old housekeeper, who had worked for him for almost 2 decades, looked up and her eyes widened when she saw a child getting out of the vehicle. In all those years, Richard had never brought visitors home, much less a small and visibly mistreated girl. "Maria," said Richard, approaching with Isabel by his side. "This is Isabel. She's going to stay with us for a while." Maria dropped the hose immediately. Her maternal instincts, dormant for decades because she had no children, awakened instantly. "Good heavens," she murmured, crouching down to the girl's height. "What happened to you, child?" Isabel looked at Richard as if asking permission to speak. He nodded encouragingly. "My aunt hung me on the bridge," she said simply. Maria closed her eyes, containing the anger that was growing in her chest. "Come here, honey. Let's get you a warm bath and some good food." While Maria took Isabel inside, Richard stood in the garden, trying to process what had happened. On an ordinary morning, his life had changed completely. A traumatized child was now in his care, and he had no idea how to handle the situation. But when he heard the sound of Isabel's laughter echoing through the silent hallways of his house, when he saw Maria smiling for the first time in years, Richard knew that he couldn't simply hand her back to this Valerie. What he didn't know was that Valerie wasn't the kind of person who would easily give up her property, and that the next few days would bring revelations that would shake everything he thought he knew about himself and about the girl he had just saved. The next 3 days completely transformed the routine of Richard Caldwell's house. The sound of small, quick footsteps through the marble halls replaced the sepulchral silence that had dominated the mansion for years. Isabel, after a long and careful bath that Maria gave her, revealed herself to be a curious and surprisingly resilient child, despite the visible traumas. "Maria, why is this house so big?" asked Isabel on the morning of the second day, sitting at the kitchen table while devouring a plate of oatmeal with honey. "Only Mr. Richard lives here?" "Yes, honey," replied Maria, watching with satisfaction as the girl ate with appetite. "It's always just been him and me, taking care of everything." Richard, who was drinking coffee, silently reading financial reports, looked up discreetly. In the past 2 days, he had noticed how Isabel asked simple questions that forced him to reflect on his solitary life. The house really was too big for one person. 15 rooms, an extensive garden, a pool he never used, all built to house a family that never came. "Mr. Richard," said Isabel, turning to him with her eyes shining with curiosity, "do you have any children?" The question hit him like a punch in the stomach. Maria stopped stirring the pot and looked at her boss, knowing how painful that subject was for him. "No, Isabel," he replied, closing the report. "I never had children." "Why? Don't you like kids?" Richard hesitated. How to explain to a 6-year-old the frustrated plans, The treatments that didn't work, the dreams that fell apart along with the accident that took Amelia. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Oh," murmured Isabel, returning to eat. "Aunt Valerie didn't like children either. She always said we were too noisy." "We?" asked Maria, sitting next to the girl. "Yes, there were more kids in the house. John, who was 7 years old, Mariana, who was still a baby, and Thomas, who was my age." Isabel spoke naturally, as if describing an obvious situation of abandonment was normal. "They went out early in the morning to work on the street too." Richard felt his blood run cold. "Work as what, Isabel?" "Asking for money at traffic lights, selling candy, cleaning car windows. Aunt Valerie said that if we didn't bring enough money, there was no food." The girl stopped eating for a moment. "John tried to run away once. When Aunt Valerie found him, she got very angry." "What did she do?" asked Maria, her voice almost a whisper. Isabel looked at her own hands. "Tied him to a chair and left him there all night. She said it was to learn not to disobey." Richard stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. The anger he felt was different from anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't the controlled irritation of bad business deals or incompetent employees. It was a primal, visceral fury that made him want to find this Valerie and bring her to justice himself. "Mr. Richard?" asked Isabel, startled by his reaction. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. "Sorry, sweetie. It's just what that woman did to you wasn't right." "I know," she said simply. "That's why I hid some coins to buy bread. But she found out and got very angry." "Was that why she hung you on the bridge?" Isabel nodded. "She said that if I wanted to be smart, I was going to learn to be really smart, that she was going to leave me there until I promised never to hide money again." Maria stood up and hugged the girl, unable to hold back her tears. "Never again, my child. Never again will anyone hurt you like that." It was at that moment that the doorbell rang. Richard frowned. He never received visitors, especially not in the middle of the morning. Maria went to answer it, and soon returned with a worried expression on her face. "Mr. Caldwell, there's a woman at the door. She says her name is Valerie, and she came to get her niece." Isabel turned pale instantly. Her fork fell on the plate with a metallic noise, and she huddled in the chair like a cornered animal. "She came to get me," she whispered, beginning to tremble. "No one's going to take you from here," Richard said firmly, approaching the girl. "Stay here with Maria. I'll talk to her." Valerie was standing on the front porch, a woman of 34, thin and disheveled in appearance. Her black hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore faded jeans and a stained blouse. But what caught Richard's attention the most were her eyes, cold, calculating, without any trace of concern or maternal affection. "You must be the rich guy who took my niece," she said without any greeting. "I'm Richard Caldwell, and you're the one responsible for abandoning a child hanging on a bridge." Valerie shrugged. "Isabel is stubborn. Sometimes she needs firmer correction." She pulled some crumpled papers from her pocket. "But that's not your problem. She's my legal responsibility. I have the documents here." Richard examined the papers she held out. They were official documents, apparently legitimate, establishing Valerie as Isabel's legal guardian after the disappearance of the child's parents 2 years earlier. "Even if these documents are true," he said, returning the papers, "that doesn't give you the right to mistreat a child." "Mistreat?" Valerie laughed, a harsh and unpleasant sound. "I take care of her, give her shelter and food. What else does a child need? Love, protection, medical care, education. Oh, the rich guy wants to give me a moral sermon?" Valerie crossed her arms. "Look here, Mr. Caldwell. I don't know what game you're playing, but Isabel is coming with me now. She has work to do." "Work? She's 6 years old." "So what? I started working at 5. It built my character." Valerie stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Now call her here, or I'll have to call the police and say you kidnapped a child." Richard felt the ground move beneath his feet. Technically, it was true. He had taken Isabel without legal authorization. Valerie had documents proving her guardianship. Any judge, looking only at the papers, would side with her. "I saved her life," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Saved her? From what?" "Isabel has always been dramatic. Probably you arrived just when she was going to climb down from the railing herself." Valerie smiled, showing yellowed teeth. "But thanks for the lodging. I'm sure she enjoyed these days off. She's not going back with you." "Oh, yes, she is. And if you try to stop me, I'm going to spread all over town that the owner of Caldwell Pharmacies kidnaps children. You'll see how that affects your business." Richard knew the power of gossip in a small town. An accusation like that, even if false, could destroy a reputation it had taken years to build. But looking into Valerie's cold eyes, thinking about the way Isabel had trembled at the sound of her name, he made a decision that would change his life forever. "I don't care what you're going to spread," he said. "Isabel is not leaving this house." Valerie laughed again. "We'll see about that. You have until tomorrow morning to change your mind. After that, I'm coming back here with the police and child protective services, and then you're going to have to explain why you're illegally detaining a child who isn't yours." She turned to leave, but stopped and looked over her shoulder. "Oh, and just so you know, Isabel knows how to be very quiet when she needs to be. She's learned that kids who make too much noise or try to run away always end up getting hurt more." After Valerie left, Richard stood on the porch for several minutes, trying to process the threat and decide on his next step. When he returned inside, he found Isabel huddled in Maria's lap, crying softly. "Is she going to take me back?" asked the girl, lifting her face wet with tears. Richard knelt in front of her, taking her small, cold hands in his. "Not if she's going to mistreat you anymore. I'm going to find a way to protect you." "But she has the papers," said Isabel, with a wisdom too sad for her age. "And I don't have anyone besides her." "Now you have me," replied Richard, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "And I'm not going to let anyone hurt you ever again." That night, while Isabel slept in the guest room that Maria had specially prepared for her, Richard stayed up late in his office, making calls and researching lawyers specializing in family law. For the first time in 5 years, he had something worth fighting for. But what he didn't know was that Valerie wasn't just an abusive guardian. She was part of something much bigger and more dangerous, and his refusal to return Isabel had just put him in the sights of people who wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to protect their shady business. The first call Richard made was to Michael Thompson, his personal lawyer for 15 years. Michael was a specialist in corporate law, but Richard trusted him completely. However, after explaining the situation, the answer wasn't encouraging. "Richard, my friend, you've gotten yourself into a serious mess," said Michael on the other end of the line. "Technically, you have illegal custody of a minor. If this Valerie has documents proving guardianship—" "Michael, you should have seen the state I found the girl in. She was literally hanging from a bridge. I understand your concern, but legally that doesn't change anything. You need a family law specialist, and you need to act fast." Michael gave him 3 names, but when Richard called the offices the next day, he found that all of them were fully booked for the next few weeks. The urgency of the situation left him increasingly desperate. Valerie had said she would return with the police, and he had no way to legally prove that Isabel was being mistreated. It was Maria who suggested the name of Sarah Miller, Mrs. Johnson's daughter, who works at the pharmacy on Main Street, graduated in law, and works with this type of case, she said during breakfast. "They say she's very good, even though she's new to the profession." Richard found Sarah's office in a modest building downtown. She received him in a small but organized room, with shelves full of law books and a desk covered in files. Sarah Miller was 38 years old, with black hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes that showed a determination that immediately caught Richard's attention. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to be direct with you," she said after hearing the whole story. The situation is delicate. Valerie has legal documents, and technically you have illegal custody of the child. But she was being mistreated. She almost fell off a bridge. I believe you, but we need concrete evidence. Witnesses, medical reports, evidence of neglect or abuse. Sarah leaned forward. Tell me more about this Valerie. Did anything about her seem strange, besides the obvious mistreatment? Richard thought for a moment. She mentioned other children. Isabel said there were 3 more children in the house, all working on the streets, and when Valerie talked about the business, it seemed very professional. Sarah's eyes sharpened. Interesting. That may indicate systematic exploitation of minors. If we can prove that. She grabbed a sheet and began to take notes. I need a few days to investigate. Meanwhile, technically, Isabel is still under your illegal custody. What if Valerie comes back with the police? Let's pray she doesn't do that before I find something. Sarah looked directly at him. Mr. Caldwell, I need to ask, why are you doing this? You don't even know this child. The question caught Richard off guard. Why was he risking his reputation, his business, his orderly life for a girl he had met just 4 days ago? I can't explain it, he said honestly. When I saw her hanging on that bridge, something inside me broke. Or maybe it was fixed. I don't know. Sarah nodded, as if she understood. I've worked with many custody cases. Usually, the people who really care about the children are the ones who doubt their own motivations the most. When Richard returned home, he found Isabel in the garden with Maria, helping to water the flowers. The girl had gained color in recent days, and her hair, now clean and combed, shone in the afternoon sun. She wore a new dress that Maria had bought, light blue with small white flowers. "Mr. Richard!" she shouted, running to hug him. "Maria taught me how to take care of the roses." "Really?" he said, surprised by the joy he felt when he saw her happy. "And how do you do that?" "You have to water them every day, but you can't wet the leaves because they get sick," explained Isabel seriously, "and you have to talk to them too." "Talk?" "Yes, plants like it when we talk to them. They grow more beautiful." Isabel looked at him with those big, bright eyes. "Do you want me to teach you how to talk to plants?" For a moment, Richard completely forgot about the legal problems, Valerie's threats, all the complication that his life had become. There was just a 6-year-old girl wanting to teach him something simple and pure, and he found that he wanted to learn. "Sure," he said, crouching down next to her. "Teach me." They spent the whole afternoon in the garden. Isabel showed Richard how to hold the hose, how to check if the soil was dry, how to remove wilted leaves, and yes, how to talk to the plants. "You have to speak sweetly," she explained, gently stroking a red rose. "Like this. Hi, beautiful flower. How are you today?" Richard felt ridiculous at first, but the seriousness with which Isabel took the task convinced him to try. "Hi, flower," he mumbled to a yellow rose. "No, mister. You have to speak with real affection," laughed Isabel. "Like this. Hi, my dear little flower, you're getting more beautiful every day." When Maria called them for dinner, Richard realized that he had spent 3 whole hours playing in the garden without thinking once about work, about reports, or about anything other than Isabel's smile and her detailed explanations about plant care. During the meal, Isabel talked about her day with the enthusiasm typical of children. "Maria showed me how to make cookies, and she let me stir the dough, and I helped her fold the clothes, and—" "Breathe, girl," laughed Maria. "You're going to choke talking so much." "It's just that I've never had such a good day," said Isabel, suddenly becoming more serious. "At Aunt Valerie's house we couldn't play during the day. We had to be quiet so we wouldn't wake her up or go out to work on the street." "And at night?" asked Richard. "At night she locked us in the room. She said kids had to go to bed early, but actually she didn't want to be bothered." Isabel stirred her food thoughtfully. "John always told us stories to go to sleep. He knew a lot of cool stories." "What kind of stories?" Of princesses who saved the princes, of kind dragons, of children who flew. Isabel's eyes sparkled with the memory. My favorite was about a girl who lived in a house full of flowers and had a grandmother who made the best sweets in the world. Maria exchanged a meaningful look with Richard. What a coincidence, she said, because I also know how to make very good sweets. Really? Asked Isabel, excited. Really? Tomorrow I can teach you how to make fudge brownies. That night, after Isabel went to sleep, Richard and Maria talked in the kitchen. She's getting attached very quickly, observed the housekeeper, and so are you. It's dangerous, isn't it? Admitted Richard. If the lawyer can't find anything against Valerie, don't think about that now. Think about how much good this time is doing for her, and for you too. For me? Maria smiled. Mr. Caldwell, it's been 5 years since I've worked in this house watching you live like a ghost. Today was the first time I've seen you smile for real. Before Richard could answer, they heard a noise coming from Isabel's room. They ran there and found the girl thrashing in bed, clearly having a nightmare. No, Aunt Valerie, please, she screamed. I brought the money, I brought it. Richard approached the bed carefully. Isabel, wake up. It's just a dream. She opened her eyes, disoriented and scared. When she saw Richard, she started to cry. I dreamed that she took me back, she sobbed, and that you couldn't save me this time. Richard sat on the edge of the bed and hugged her, feeling his heart tighten. It was just a nightmare, sweetie. You're safe here. Promise you won't let her take me? I promise, he said, surprised by the firmness of his own voice. No matter what happens, I'm going to protect you. But as he comforted Isabel until she fell back asleep, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a promise he might not be able to keep. Valerie had the law on her side, and he was fighting the entire system armed only with love and determination. What he didn't know was that the next morning, Sarah Miller would call with findings that would completely change the course of the battle he was about to face. Sarah's call came at 7 in the morning, just as Richard was drinking his first coffee. Mr. Caldwell, I need to see you urgently. I've discovered some things about Valerie that completely change our strategy. An hour later, Richard was back in the lawyer's office, but this time she had a stack of papers on the desk and a much more confident expression on her face. I spent all night investigating, began Sarah, organizing the documents. Valerie has no permanent address registered for 2 years. She has moved at least 6 times in the last year, always to rented houses in different neighborhoods. That's already suspicious in itself. Suspicious how? People who exploit children often change address, frequently, to avoid the attention of the authorities. Sarah picked up another paper. But there's more. I managed to contact the social worker who handled the case when Isabel's parents disappeared. Richard leaned forward. And Marcia Reynolds, the social worker, always distrusted Valerie's version. According to her, Valerie appeared suddenly claiming to be Isabel's aunt, but was never able to provide convincing evidence of the family relationship. How come she was never able? Doesn't she have the documents? She has them, but they are documents that can be easily falsified. Second copies of birth certificates, self-written declarations, nothing that can't be forged by someone who knows the system. Sarah leafed through more papers. Marcia said she tried to investigate more deeply at the time, but had pressure from superiors to expedite the process and hand over custody soon. Richard's business mind began to work. Pressure from whom? That she couldn't tell me, but she promised to check in the old files. Sarah pulled a photo from one of the folders. Do you recognize this child? It was a photo of a boy of about 7 years, brown hair, big and sad eyes very similar to Isabel's. Isabel mentioned a John in Valerie's house. Could that be him? John Davis, 7 years old, disappeared from home 8 months ago. The family filed a police report, but the child was never found. Sarah showed more photos. Michelle Smith, 3 years old, missing for 6 months. Thomas Wilson, 6 years old, missing for 4 months. Richard felt his stomach churn. All the children that Isabel mentioned. Exactly. And all the disappearances happened within a radius of 50 miles of Phoenix. Sarah put the photos together. Mr. Caldwell, I believe that Valerie is not just a negligent guardian. She is involved with kidnapping and exploitation of minors. My God, murmured Richard. And Isabel? Isabel was probably just another victim. The difference is that in her case, Valerie managed to forge convincing documents and won legal custody. Sarah stood up and began to walk around the room. That explains why she is so determined to recover Isabel. It's not just a matter of money. It's a matter of maintaining the legal facade. What do we do now? Now we have ammunition. I'm going to file a lawsuit questioning the legitimacy of Valerie's guardianship based on the suspicions of false documentation and the pattern of disappearances. Sarah sat back down. I'm also going to request a complete criminal investigation. Richard felt a momentary relief, but it was quickly replaced by concern. And in the meantime, Valerie won't wait quietly. That's why I need you to be very careful. Keep Isabel always under supervision. Don't let her leave the house alone, and if Valerie shows up again, don't let her in. Call me immediately. When Richard arrived home, he found Isabel in the kitchen with Maria, both covered in flour and laughing while trying to make cookies. The domestic scene contrasted violently with the sinister revelations he had just heard. "Mr. Richard!" shouted Isabel, running to hug him with her hands dirty with dough. "I'm learning how to make sugar cookies." "Really?" he said, forcing a smile. "And how's it going?" "Hard. The dough stuck to my hand and I dropped flour on the floor, but Maria said it's normal the first time." Maria approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "How did it go with the lawyer?" "We'll talk later," said Richard discreetly, indicating Isabel with his eyes. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Isabel was so entertained with the cookies that she didn't notice Richard's growing tension. He tried to focus on work, reviewing reports from the pharmacies in his office, but his thoughts always returned to the photos that Sarah had shown him. 3 missing children, all Isabel's age, all victims of the same woman who now threatened to regain her custody. It was during lunch that Isabel asked a question that chilled Richard's blood. "Mr. Richard, do you think John, Michelle, and Thomas are okay?" Richard almost choked on his food. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" "Because I keep thinking about them. The last time I saw them, John was very hurt because he tried to protect Michelle when Aunt Valerie got mad at her." Isabel stirred her food thoughtfully. "And Thomas was always sick, but Aunt Valerie never took him to the doctor." "Hurt how?" asked Maria softly. "John had a cut on his forehead and his arm was kind of crooked. He said he had fallen down the stairs, but I don't think that's what happened." Isabel looked at Richard. "Aunt Valerie hit the boys a lot. The girls too, but the boys were worse." "And you never tried to run away too?" asked Richard. "I tried once, but she found me at the grocery store and brought me back. After that, she started taking me to work at the intersection. She said that way she could watch me better." Isabel stopped eating. "Mr. Richard, do you think I'm going to have to go back there?" The simple and direct question from a 6-year-old hit him like a slap in the face. How to explain that he was doing everything in his power, but that he couldn't guarantee anything? How to say that the legal system that should protect her might force her to return to the nightmare? "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen," he said finally. "But you can't promise, right?" said Isabel with a wisdom too sad for her age. Before Richard could answer, the doorbell rang. Maria went to answer it and came back pale. "It's Valerie, and she brought a man with her." Richard stood up immediately. "Isabel, go to your room and stay there until I call you. Maria, stay with her." "No," said Isabel, grabbing his arm. "Don't leave me alone." "What if she gets into the house?" "She's not going to get in, I promise. Richard went out to the porch and found Valerie accompanied by a burly man of about 40 years old, wearing a cheap suit and with an intimidating expression on his face. "The game is over, Mr. Caldwell," said Valerie without ceremony. "This here is Mark, my lawyer. We've come to get Isabel." The man stepped forward. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Mark Duncan, legal representative of Ms. Valerie. You are committing a crime by detaining a minor against the will of her legal guardian. And you are committing a crime by exploiting children," replied Richard. Valerie laughed. "Exploit? What exploit? I take care of my niece. If you don't hand her over now, we're going to call the police." "Call them," said Richard with more courage than he felt. "I have a lawyer too." Mark took a paper out of his pocket. "Here's a court order determining that the child be immediately handed over to her legal guardian. If you don't comply, you will be arrested for contempt." Richard took the paper with trembling hands. It looked official. It had stamps and signatures, but something didn't add up. "I'll need to verify the authenticity of this document." "Verify all you want," said Mark, "but in the meantime, the child stays with me." "No way." It was at that moment that Valerie lost patience. "Enough of this nonsense. Isabel, get out here right now." Her scream echoed through the house, and Richard could hear Isabel starting to cry inside. The anger he felt was different from anything he had ever experienced. "Get off my property right now," he said, his voice low but full of threat. "Or what?" provoked Mark. "Are you going to call your goons?" "I don't need goons to deal with people like you." Valerie and Mark exchanged a look. "You have 1 hour to decide," she said. "After that, we're coming back with reinforcements." After they left, Richard stood on the porch, trying to process what had happened. The court order that Mark had shown was obviously fake, but they were escalating the situation quickly. When he returned inside, he found Isabel embraced with Maria, both crying. "She's going to take me, isn't she?" asked Isabel between sobs. Richard knelt in front of her and held her little hands. "Not while I'm alive to stop it." But even as he said that, he knew that he was fighting a battle that he might not be able to win. Valerie had legal documents, connections that could falsify court orders, and apparently a lawyer willing to use any means necessary. The war for Isabel's life was just beginning, and Richard was discovering that there were enemies much more dangerous than he imagined. Richard called Sarah immediately after Valerie left, but it went to voicemail. He tried 3 more times before he managed to talk to her 2 hours later. When she finally answered, the lawyer's voice sounded tense. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm glad you called. I'm having problems here." "What kind of problems?" "I received a call from the Bar Association questioning my conduct in the Isabel case. Someone made a complaint saying that I'm acting unethically by helping a child kidnapper." Richard felt the ground move under his feet. "Can they stop you from representing me?" "They can open a disciplinary investigation, yes, and while that lasts, I'm in a very delicate situation." Sarah paused. "Mr. Caldwell, these people have more influence than we imagined. Valerie was here with a supposed lawyer and a fake court order. They're escalating the situation." "Fake court order? Can you send me a picture of the document?" Richard photographed the paper and sent it by cell phone. 15 minutes later, Sarah called back. "It's a crude forgery. The stamp is wrong, the numbering doesn't match, and the judge who supposedly signed it has been on vacation for 2 weeks. Her voice sounded relieved. "That's great for our case. Use of a fake document is a serious crime, but it doesn't solve our immediate problem. They said they're coming back in an hour with reinforcements. Listen, I'm going to do the following. I'm going straight to the police station to file a police report about the fake document and the threat. In the meantime, don't let anyone into your house. If they come back, call 911 immediately." After hanging up, Richard gathered Maria and Isabel in the living room. The girl was visibly scared, embraced with a doll that Maria had bought for her. "We're going to have to stay all together today," he explained. "No one leaves the house, no one answers the door unless it's Sarah or the police." "Mr. Richard," said Isabel with a small voice, "are you scared too?" The child's direct question caught him off guard. How to be honest without scaring her even more. "I'm worried," he admitted, "but I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you. Is Aunt Valerie stronger than you?" "It's not a matter of strength, sweetie. It's a matter of doing what's right and having the right people on our side." Maria approached. "Isabel, how about we go make a cake? I have a special recipe from my grandmother that I only make on special days." The strategy worked. For a few hours the kitchen was filled with the familiar aromas of homemade cake and the laughter of Isabel learning to crack eggs without spilling. Richard tried to work in the office, but he couldn't concentrate. Every noise on the street made him jump, expecting to see Valerie returning with reinforcements. Around 4 in the afternoon, he received an unexpected call. It was Patrice Johnson, the social worker who had handled Isabel's case 2 years earlier. "Mr. Caldwell, Dr. Miller gave me your contact information. I need to talk to you urgently." "You can talk." "Not over the phone. Can I come to your house now?" "It's about Isabel and about things I discovered in the old files." An hour later, Patrice was in Richard's living room. She was a middle-aged woman, grey hair and tired eyes of someone who had seen a lot of bad things in life. She carried a thick folder with documents. "Mr. Caldwell, when Dr. Miller contacted me, I decided to review all of Isabel's process, and I found very disturbing things." "What kind of things?" Patrice opened the folder and took out several papers. First, the inconsistencies in Valerie's documentation. The documents she presented at the time had dates that didn't match, stamps from notary offices that didn't exist, and witnesses that we never managed to locate. Why was custody granted anyway? "Because I received direct pressure from my boss at the time, Arthur Jenkins. He said that the case was taking too long, that we needed to expedite it." Patrice picked up another document. "But now I found out that Arthur was fired 6 months later for corruption. He was receiving money to expedite irregular adoption processes." Richard felt a cold anger growing in his chest. How many children were harmed by this? "We don't know for sure. The files that he manipulated were lost during a flood in the basement where they were stored." Patrice made quotes with her fingers. "Very convenient flood, if you allow me the observation." "And Isabel?" "Isabel was one of the last children processed by Arthur before he was fired. And now, I'm sure that her guardianship was fraudulent." Patrice took a photo from the folder. "Do you recognize this woman?" It was a photo of Valerie, but younger, perhaps 10 years ago. She was next to a tall and thin man that Richard didn't recognize. This photo was taken in a police operation in Albuquerque 8 years ago. Valerie was arrested along with this man, Robert Diaz, for child exploitation. They kept children in captivity and used them to beg in the streets. She has a criminal record? She had one. But mysteriously, her entire criminal process disappeared from the files. I only found this photo by chance, in a folder that was filed incorrectly. Patrice saved the photo. "Mr. Caldwell, Valerie is not Isabel's guardian. She is a criminal who forged documents to have legal access to an orphan child. Where are Isabel's real parents?" Patrice hesitated. "That's the most painful part. I managed to track what really happened to them 2 years ago." She took another document from the folder. "Robert and Sylvia Rodriguez, Isabel's biological parents, died in a workplace accident on a construction site of Anderson and Sons Construction." The name of the construction company made Richard freeze. "Anderson and Sons Construction." "Yes, why do you know it?" Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of a terrible revelation falling on him. "Anderson and Sons Construction was the company I hired to renovate my pharmacies 2 years ago. I may have been indirectly responsible for Isabel's situation." "How so?" "If her parents died on a construction site that I hired..." Richard couldn't finish the sentence. The guilt he felt was overwhelming. Patrice leaned forward. "Mr. Caldwell, the accident happened because the construction company neglected basic safety measures to save money. There were labor complaints against them for months. You had no way of knowing. But if I had checked the company better before hiring—" "Stop it," said Patrice firmly. "It's not your fault. The blame is on those who exploited this tragedy to take advantage of an orphan child." At that moment, they heard the gate being opened violently. Richard ran to the window and saw Valerie walking towards the house, this time accompanied not only by Mark, but by two other men of intimidating appearance. "They're back," he said to Patrice. "Call the police right now," she replied, grabbing her cell phone. Richard ran to the kitchen, where Maria and Isabel were still decorating the cake. "Isabel, go to your room now and hide in the closet. Don't leave there until I come get you." "What's happening?" asked the girl, her eyes filling with tears. "Aunt Valerie came back, but I'm not going to let her take you. Go with Maria and stay hidden." The doorbell rang violently, followed by loud knocks on the door. "Open this door, Richard," shouted Valerie. "The game is over." Richard went to the front door, but didn't open it. "Get off my property." "We're not leaving without the child," replied Mark. "We have a court order." "Fake court order. We've already reported you for document forgery." The knocks on the door became more violent. "If you don't open, we're going to break it down," threatened a voice that Richard didn't recognize. Patrice appeared next to him, talking on the phone with the police. "They said a patrol car is on the way," she whispered. Suddenly, they heard the sound of glass breaking in the back of the house. Someone had broken a back window. "They broke into the house," shouted Maria from the hallway. Richard ran towards the bedrooms, finding one of Valerie's men already inside the house, looking for Isabel. "Get out of my house now," he shouted. "Only after I find the girl," replied the man, pushing Richard to the side. It was at that moment that the police sirens began to sound on the street. The invader hesitated, looking at the window. "Police!" shouted Valerie from outside. "Run!" The man ran back to the broken window and disappeared into the yard. Richard ran to the front of the house and opened the door to receive the police officers, his hands trembling with adrenaline and anger. "They broke into my house," he said to the sergeant who commanded the operation. "They broke a window and came in looking for a child. Where are the invaders now?" "They fled when they heard the sirens." Patrice approached, showing her professional identification. "Sergeant, I'm a social worker, and I can explain the whole situation. These criminals are trying to kidnap a child using fake documents." While Patrice explained the case to the police, Richard went to look for Isabel. He found her hidden in the closet of her room, trembling and crying silently. When she saw him, she threw herself into his arms. "They broke into the house?" she asked between sobs. "They did, but they're gone now. The police are here." Richard hugged her tightly. "You're safe, but they'll come back, won't they?" The child's simple question made him realize that his fight was far from over. Valerie had shown that she was willing to use violence to get Isabel back, and that meant that none of them were really safe. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we're going to be prepared." While the police made the report of the invasion and Patrice provided all the evidence she had collected, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He could no longer simply react to Valerie's actions. It was time to go on the offensive and discover the whole truth about the child exploitation ring of which Isabel had been a victim. The next morning, Richard woke up with an iron resolution. The invasion of his house had been the last straw. It was no longer enough just to protect Isabel. He needed to completely destroy Valerie's network to ensure that other children didn't suffer the same fate. After breakfast, he called Maria for a serious conversation while Isabel played in the garden under careful supervision. "Maria, I need to be away for a few hours today. I'm going to personally investigate some addresses that Patrice gave me yesterday." "Mr. Caldwell, isn't that dangerous? After what happened yesterday, that's why. I can't just wait for them to attack again." Richard looked out the window, watching Isabel talking to the plants as she had taught him. "She deserves to know she's really safe. And what if something happens while you're gone? I've already talked to Sergeant Davis. They're going to keep frequent patrols around the house today." And Patrice is going to come stay with you two while I'm gone. The first address on Patrice's list was a house in the South Mountain neighborhood, on the outskirts of Phoenix. Richard parked a block away and watched the place for a few minutes. It was a simple house with bars on the windows and a walled yard, seemingly abandoned. As he approached the gate, he noticed that the grass was high and there was mail piling up in the mailbox. Definitely abandoned for months. But as he went around the house, he found something disturbing. In the backyard, there were remnants of broken toys scattered on the grass, a doll without a head, cracked plastic cars, pieces of children's games. "Can I help you with something?" Richard turned around, startled. It was an old man, probably a neighbor, who was watching him curiously from the yard next door. "I'm looking for information about who lived here," said Richard. "Oh, that strange woman with the kids." "They left about 3 months ago." The old man approached the fence. "I always found that situation strange." "Strange how?" "A lot of kids in one house, and they always seemed sad. They never played. They never made normal kid noises, you know. And the woman, she yelled at them a lot." "Did you ever see how many children there were?" "Hard to say. They always left early and came back late. But I saw at least 4 or 5 different ones." The old man lowered his voice. "Once I saw the woman dragging a little girl by her hair into the house. The girl was crying, saying she had lost the money she had earned." Richard felt his stomach churn. "Did you ever call the police?" "I thought about calling, but you know how it is, right? You're never sure, and then it can cause problems." The man seemed genuinely regretful. "Now, I regret not having done anything." The second address was a rented house in downtown, near the Greyhound bus station. This time, Richard was more cautious. He parked far away and walked around the block, observing the movement. The house was occupied, but by a seemingly normal family. He saw a woman hanging clothes in the yard while 2 children played nearby. He decided to approach the neighborhood indirectly. He entered a bakery nearby and struck up a conversation with the owner. "Do you know the family that lives in that yellow house on the corner?" he asked, pointing discreetly. "Oh, the Johnsons? They're good people. They've lived there for about 2 months." The baker cleaned the counter thoughtfully. Before them, there was a strange woman there, always with a lot of children, but they didn't seem to be hers. "How so?" "The children were very different from each other, different ages, and all very skinny and neglected. And the woman, she never bought enough food for so many children." "Do you know why she left?" "Not really. I just know that one night there was a commotion there. Police, ambulance. The next day, the house was empty." Richard felt a chill down his spine. "Ambulance?" "Yeah. They took a child. It looked like a little girl. But I never knew what happened." The third address was the furthest away, in a rural area on the outskirts of the city. The dirt road was in terrible condition, and Richard almost gave up on continuing when his car got stuck in a mud puddle. He managed to get out after much effort, but arrived at the location covered in mud and with his nerves on edge. The property was isolated, surrounded by a high wall and iron gate. Through the bars, Richard could see a large and poorly maintained house, with several smaller outbuildings scattered across the grounds. The place had an abandoned and sinister air that made him question whether he should be there alone. He was about to leave when he heard voices coming from inside the property, children's voices. His heart raced. He put his ear to the gate and managed to distinguish at least 2 different children's voices, speaking low as if they were afraid of being heard. One of them seemed to be a boy, the other of a very small girl. Richard took out his cell phone to call the police, but realized that he had no signal in the rural area. He tried to open the gate, but it was locked with a padlock. He went around the property looking for another access and found a lower part of the wall in the back. He climbed with difficulty and jumped into the grounds. His heart was beating so hard that he was sure he could be heard from yards away. He cautiously approached the main house, trying to locate where the voices were coming from. The voices became clearer as he approached one of the smaller outbuildings. It was a construction that seemed to be a storage or garage, but it had bars on the windows as if it were a prison. "John, do you think anyone is going to come get us?" He heard the voice of a very small girl. "I don't know, Michelle. Auntie said that if we behave well, maybe she'll let us go out to work again." Richard froze. John and Michelle, the names that Isabel had mentioned. The missing children were there, trapped in that location. He tried to get closer to the barred window to see the inside, but stepped on a dry branch that made a loud noise. Immediately, the children's voices stopped. "Someone's outside," whispered one of the children. "Be quiet," replied another. Richard approached the window and whispered, "John, Michelle, I'm a friend of Isabel." The silence was total for a few seconds. Then, a trembling little voice asked, "Isabel, where is she? Is she okay?" "She's safe. I came to get you." "You can't," said the boy's voice urgently. "If they find out you're here, they're going to hurt everyone. Go away." "I'm not leaving without you. Please go away. Auntie Valerie said that if someone tried to take us from here, she was going to do bad things to us." Richard was trying to figure out how to open the barred window when he heard the sound of cars approaching. Total panic took over him. He ran back to the wall and climbed desperately, scratching his arms on the rough stones. He managed to get out of the property seconds before two cars entered through the main gate. From afar, he saw Valerie get out of one of the cars, accompanied by three men. His heart almost stopped when he realized that one of them was carrying what appeared to be a gun. Richard ran to his car and left the area as quickly as possible, without worrying about the potholes in the road. He only stopped when he reached an area with cell phone signal and immediately called the police. "I found the missing children," he said, as soon as the attendant identified himself. "They're being held in a rural property. I need to talk to Sergeant Davis urgently." 15 minutes later, he was at the meeting point with Sergeant Davis at a gas station on the main road. He explained everything he had seen and heard, providing the exact location of the property. "Mr. Caldwell, what you did was very dangerous," said the sergeant, "but the information is valuable. We're going to organize an operation for tonight." "Tonight? What if they move the children?" "It's a risk we have to take. An operation like this needs to be planned carefully, with the right personnel and the appropriate warrants." When Richard arrived home, he found Isabel in the garden with Patrice, the two planting seedlings of flowers in a new flower bed. The girl ran to hug him as soon as she saw him. "Mr. Richard, Aunt Patrice taught me how to plant petunias." "Really?" he said, forcing a smile despite the tension he felt. "And how was it?" "Fun! She said that if I take good care of them, they'll grow and become very colorful." Isabel looked at him curiously. "Why are you dirty?" Richard looked at his clothes stained with mud and at the scratches on his arms. "I had to solve some work things in a more rustic area." Patrice approached, noticing his appearance. "Did everything go well?" "More or less. I'll talk to you later," he said, indicating Isabel with his eyes. That night, after Isabel went to sleep, Richard told Patrice and Maria about his discovery. The two were shocked. "My God," murmured Maria, "those poor children." "The police are going to do an operation tonight," said Richard. "If everything goes well, John, Michelle, and the other children will be free tomorrow." "And if it doesn't go well," asked Patrice, "then Valerie is going to know that we're actively investigating, and that could make our situation even more dangerous." Around midnight, Richard's phone rang. It was Sergeant Davis. "Mr. Caldwell, I have news about the operation. Were you able to rescue the children?" "We were. We found 4 children on the property, including John and Michelle. They're all being treated at the hospital, and we're already arranging for them to return to their families." Richard felt an enormous relief. And Valerie. She managed to escape along with 2 of the men, but we found enough evidence on the site to prosecute her for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and child exploitation. Does that mean Isabel is safe? Safer, yes. But Valerie is still on the run, and people like her usually don't give up easily. The sergeant paused. Mr. Caldwell, I suggest that you take extra precautions for the next few days. After hanging up, Richard stood on the porch watching the silent street. He had managed to save John, Michelle, and other children, but Valerie was still free, and a desperate woman who had just lost her source of income and was being pursued by the police was even more dangerous than before. The battle was far from over, and he had the feeling that Valerie was preparing a last and desperate attack. 3 days had passed since the rescue of the children, and Richard was beginning to believe that perhaps Valerie had finally given up or fled the region. Isabel was more animated, playing normally in the garden, and even asking when she could start attending school like other children her age. It was on a Thursday afternoon that everything fell apart. Richard was in the office of one of his pharmacies reviewing sales reports when Maria called in a panic. Mr. Caldwell, come home immediately. It's about Isabel. What happened? Is she okay? She disappeared. She was playing in the garden, and when I went to call her for a snack, she wasn't there anymore. Richard felt the world spin around him. Did you look all over the house? I looked everywhere. In her room, in the attic, in the garage, even in the pool. Maria's voice was broken by crying. And I found this on the gate. What? A note. It says, if you want the girl back, come alone to the bridge where it all started. Midnight. If you bring the police, you'll never see her alive again. Richard dropped the phone. His hands were trembling so much that it took him 3 tries to get the car started. The drive home was a haze of despair and self-reproach. How had he been careless? How had he let Valerie get close to Isabel? When he arrived home, he found Maria on the porch, embracing the note, crying. Patrice had arrived and was already on the phone with the police. No! Shouted Richard, snatching the phone from her hand. She said that if we call the police, Richard, you can't go alone. It's an obvious trap. I don't care. It's Isabel. He looked at the note. The handwriting was clearly Valerie's, scrawled and aggressive. She's only 6 years old. She must be terrified. Maria approached him. Mr. Caldwell, think carefully. If something happens to you, who's going to take care of Isabel? If I don't go, she might hurt Isabel just to get revenge. Patrice took the note from his hands. Let me call Sergeant Davis. Maybe we can find a way to ensure everyone's safety. No, Valerie is smart. If she notices any police movement, she could do something terrible. Richard began to walk back and forth in the room. I have to go alone. And then, even if she returns Isabel, do you think she's just going to leave you alone? Patrice's question made Richard stop. It was true. Even if he got Isabel back, Valerie would continue to be a threat. Unless... Patrice, can you do something for me? What? Call Sergeant Davis and ask them to set up a discreet operation around the bridge, very discreet at a distance. If something goes wrong with me, at least they can act. What if she notices? It's a risk I have to take. The hours until midnight dragged on like an eternity. Richard tried to eat something, but he couldn't swallow. Maria prepared a calming tea, but his hands were trembling so much that he could barely hold the cup. Mr. Caldwell, said Maria around 11 at night, I want you to know that if something happens, I'm going to take care of Isabel as if she were my own daughter. Nothing is going to happen, he said, more to himself than to her. I'm going to bring our girl back. At Green River Bridge was completely deserted when Richard arrived. The same bridge where he had saved Isabel a week ago, a week that seemed like a lifetime. He parked the car and walked slowly towards the center of the bridge, his steps echoing in the silence of the early morning. Valerie, he shouted. I'm here. Where's Isabel? There was no answer, just the sound of the water running under the bridge and the distant noise of some cars on the highway. Richard checked his watch. 5 past midnight. Valerie! A voice came from the shadows near the end of the bridge. Did you come alone, like I told you? Richard turned and saw Valerie emerging from the darkness. She was holding Isabel by the hand, and the girl seemed to be fine but clearly frightened. Even in the dark, he could see that Isabel's eyes were swollen from crying so much. "Mr. Richard," she shouted, trying to run towards him, but Valerie pulled her back violently. "Shut up," hissed Valerie. Then she turned to Richard. "It's time to settle the score. Let her go. The problem is with me, not with an innocent child." "Innocent?" Valerie laughed, a harsh sound full of bitterness. "This girl cost me everything. Because of her, I lost my business, my other kids, and now I'm being hunted by the police. Your business was exploiting children. That's not work. It's a crime. It was my livelihood. It was my life." Valerie took a step forward, dragging Isabel along. "And you destroyed everything because you thought you were a hero, saving a girl from the bridge." Richard could see that Valerie was visibly altered. Her eyes shone with a dangerous instability, and she seemed to be under the influence of some substance. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "I want justice. You took away my source of income, so you're going to compensate me." "How much?" $100,000 in cash. Richard was silent for a moment. It was a large amount, but he could afford to pay. "Okay, but first, let the girl go." "Do you think I'm an idiot? First the money, then I let her go. How can I be sure you'll keep your word? You can't, but it's the only chance you have to save your darling." Isabel began to cry softly. "Mr. Richard, I want to go home." "Quiet!" shouted Valerie, shaking the girl violently. It was at that moment that Richard noticed something shiny in Valerie's free hand. It was a small knife, but sharp enough to cause serious damage to a child. "Valerie, let's talk calmly. You want money? I have money. There's no need to hurt anyone." "Oh, now you want to negotiate. When you invaded my property and called the police, were you thinking of negotiating?" "I was thinking of saving children who were being mistreated." "Mistreated?" Valerie laughed again. "I gave shelter, food, protection to children who had no one. It was a social service. Forcing them to beg and work on the streets is not social service. It was education. I was teaching them how to survive in the real world." Richard realized that he wouldn't be able to convince Valerie through reason. The woman was completely out of her mind, living in a distorted reality where she saw herself as a victim instead of a criminal. "Okay," he said. "You're right. Maybe I was hasty. We can solve this civilizedly." Valerie looked at him suspiciously. "Solve how?" "I'll give you the money you're asking for. You let Isabel go, and we each go our own way. Simple as that. And then you call the police to arrest me." "No, you have my word." Richard lied, knowing that he would do anything to see Valerie behind bars. "I just want my daughter back." "Your daughter?" Valerie guffawed. "She's not your daughter. You've known her for a week." "She's my daughter at heart, and a week was enough for me to realize that I would give my life for her." It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Isabel, who had been quiet during the discussion, suddenly broke free from Valerie's hand and ran towards Richard. "Isabel, no!" shouted Valerie, running after the girl with the knife in her hand. Richard lunged forward, managing to catch Isabel in his arms and place himself between her and Valerie. The woman's knife tore his shirt, cutting his arm superficially, but he managed to protect the child. "Run!" he shouted, pushing Isabel towards the car. "Go to the car and hide!" Valerie tried to hit him again, but Richard managed to grab her wrist. The two struggled in the middle of the bridge, the man trying to disarm the desperate woman. "You destroyed my life!" shouted Valerie, trying to break free. "Destroyed everything. You destroyed your own life when you started mistreating children," replied Richard, finally managing to disarm Valerie. It was then that the police sirens began to sound, approaching rapidly. Valerie looked around desperately, realizing that she was cornered. "You lied," she accused. "You said you were coming alone." "I lied to protect an innocent child, something you would never understand." Sergeant Davis and his team arrived at the bridge with their weapons drawn, surrounding Valerie quickly. "Drop any weapon and put your hands up." Valerie looked at Richard with pure hatred in her eyes. "This isn't over," she said. "I'll always find a way to get revenge." "Yes, it is," replied Richard, hugging Isabel, who had run back to him as soon as she saw the police. "You're never going to hurt any child again." While Valerie was being handcuffed and placed in the police car, Isabel clung to Richard as if she would never let go. "Mr. Richard, were you scared?" "I was, sweetie. Very scared. But you came to save me anyway. I'm always going to come save you. Always." But as they took Valerie away, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets about Isabel's past that needed to be discovered, and that the real battle for the girl's life was just beginning. A week after Valerie's arrest, life in Richard's house was beginning to find a new rhythm. Isabel still woke up some nights with nightmares, but she was gradually regaining the confidence and natural joy of a 6-year-old child. Maria had become a definitive maternal figure, and Richard discovered daily how the love for a child could completely transform a man's perspective. It was on a Tuesday morning that Sarah called with an urgency in her voice that immediately put Richard on alert. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to see you today. I discovered something about Isabel that's going to change everything." "What kind of thing?" "I prefer to explain in person. Can you come to my office at 2 in the afternoon? Can you give me a hint of what it's about?" Sarah hesitated. "It's about her real parents. And about you." The phrase echoed in Richard's head throughout the morning. What could Sarah have discovered about him in relation to Isabel's parents? He already knew that they had worked on the construction that he had hired, but was there some other connection? At 2 o'clock sharp, he was in Sarah's office. The lawyer received him with a serious expression and a thick folder on the table. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to tell you some things that are going to be hard to hear," she began, opening the folder. "After Valerie was arrested, I got access to the complete files of Isabel's parents' case. And Robert and Sylvia Rodriguez really worked on the construction of Anderson and Sons construction that you hired. But there are details about the accident that were not disclosed at the time." Sarah took a report from the folder. "The accident happened because the construction company was using defective safety equipment to save costs. Robert was working at a height of 25 feet when the safety cable broke." Richard felt his stomach churn. "And Sylvia? Sylvia wasn't on the construction site. She worked on the construction site for a few months, but was fired 2 weeks before the accident." "Fired why?" "Because she discovered the irregularities in the safety equipment and threatened to report the company." Sarah showed another document. She had written a formal letter to Anderson and Sons Construction warning about the risks, but was fired the next day for insubordination. The revelation hit Richard like a punch. She tried to prevent the accident. She tried. And she was punished for it. Sarah pulled another sheet. "But there's more. After being fired, Sylvia sought the office that hired the construction company to report the irregularities." "What office?" "Yours, Mr. Caldwell. She was in your office 3 days before the accident that killed her husband." Richard was completely silent, trying to process the information. She talked to me?" "She spoke to your secretary at the time, Mrs. Peterson. She asked to schedule an urgent meeting with you, said she had important information about the construction of the pharmacies." "And Mrs. Peterson scheduled the meeting for the day after the accident. Sylvia never showed up because she was in the hospital identifying her husband's body." The guilt that Richard felt was overwhelming. If he had received Sylvia that day, if he had listened to her warnings about the construction company, perhaps he could have prevented the accident. Robert would still be alive. Isabel would have her parents, and none of the nightmare that she lived with Valerie would have happened. "Are you sure about this?" he asked with a hoarse voice. "Absolutely sure." I have here Mrs. Peterson's agenda from the time, the record of Sylvia's call, and even the recording of the call. Sarah paused. There's something else. What else could there be? I discovered why Valerie managed to forge the custody document so easily. Sarah took more papers from the folder. Robert Rodriguez had a younger brother, Ethan Rodriguez. He really existed and really was a relative of Isabel. Where is he? He died 3 years ago in a traffic accident in Los Angeles. Valerie used his identity to create a false story about family relationship. Richard sat down again, completely emotionally exhausted. So, Isabel really has no one. She doesn't have living relatives, no. But she has you. How can I take care of her knowing that I'm responsible for her situation? Mr. Caldwell, can I ask you a question? Do you love Isabel? Of course I love her. And does she love you? Yes. Then the rest doesn't matter. What happened in the past was a tragedy, but what matters now is her future. Sarah leaned forward. Isabel needs a family, safety, love. You can give her all of that. But what if she finds out the truth? What if she knows that I'm responsible for her parents' situation? She'll find out when she's mature enough to understand. And then you'll explain that even having made a terrible mistake in the past, you're dedicating the rest of your life to compensate by taking care of her. When Richard arrived home, he found Isabel in the garden with Maria, the two planting daisies in a new flower bed. The girl ran to hug him as she always did, and he felt his heart break with guilt and love at the same time. Mr. Richard, look how many flowers we planted today. They're beautiful, sweetie, he said, hugging her tighter than usual. Are you sad? She asked, looking at his face with that sharp perception of children. I'm thinking about some adult things. Bad things? Complicated things. Isabel held his face with her little hands. Maria told me that when we're sad, we have to remember the good things. Do you want me to tell you the good things in my life? I do. First, I have the best mister in the world. Second, I have the best Grandma Maria in the world. Third, I have a beautiful house with a garden full of flowers. Fourth, no one hurts me anymore. And fifth, she smiled, I know you really love me. Isabel's simple words were like a balm for Richard's tortured soul. Looking at that child who had survived so much suffering and still managed to see beauty in life, he understood that Sarah was right. What mattered was not the past that he couldn't change, but the future that he could still build. Isabel, he said, would you like me to be officially your dad? Her eyes widened. What do you mean? Through a legal adoption. You would officially become my daughter, I would officially become your father, and no one could ever separate us again. Forever. Forever. Isabel jumped into his arms, shouting with joy, Yes, yes, I want to. Maria approached, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. Mr. Caldwell, are you sure? Absolutely sure. This girl is my daughter at heart. Now I want her to be my daughter by law too. That night, after Isabel fell asleep, Richard called Sarah. I want to start the adoption process immediately. Are you sure, after everything we talked about today? Especially after everything we talked about today. Isabel deserves a family, and I need her as much as she needs me. Are you going to tell her about her parents? When she's ready. When she's older and can understand that sometimes people make terrible mistakes, but that those mistakes can be transformed into something beautiful if we dedicate ourselves to doing good. A week later, Sarah had all the documentation ready to start the adoption process. There would be no legal obstacles. Isabel was an orphan, Valerie was in prison and had lost any right over the child, and Richard was a wealthy and respected citizen with the full capacity to provide her with a stable and loving home. The only hurdle was the emotional one, the weight of the past that Richard carried on his shoulders, and the uncertainty of when and how he should reveal the truth to Isabel. But looking at the little girl sleeping peacefully in her new room, surrounded by toys and stuffed animals, Richard knew that he was ready to face any challenge to ensure her happiness. After all, he had promised to protect her, and he was determined to keep that promise, even if it meant confronting his own demons and revealing a past that he would rather forget. The little beggar girl had cried for help, and a millionaire had done something incredible, and it was only the beginning. As Richard looked at his soon-to-be daughter, he knew this was a new chapter in both their lives, and knew the best was yet to come. The end, child, and Richard met all the requirements to be an adoptive parent. But what none of them expected was that, the next day, a completely unexpected revelation would change everything again, bringing to light secrets about Isabel's past that not even Valerie knew. The revelation came completely unexpectedly on a Saturday morning. Richard was in the garden with Isabel, teaching her how to prune the rose bushes, when Maria appeared on the porch with a troubled expression on her face. "Mr. Caldwell, there's a lady here who says she's Isabel's grandmother." Richard felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean, grandmother?" "She says her name is Patricia Rodriguez, that she's Sylvia's mother, and that she's been looking for her granddaughter for 2 years. Isabel raised her curious little eyes. "I have a grandma." "Stay here in the garden, sweetie," said Richard, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm going to talk to the lady, and I'll be right back." In the living room, Richard found a woman of about 65 years old, grey hair, tied in a simple bun, wearing modest but clean clothes. Her eyes were just like Isabel's, big, brown, expressive. There was an undeniable resemblance. "Are you Richard Caldwell?" she asked, standing up when he entered. "I am." "And you are?" "Patricia Rodriguez. I'm Sylvia Rodriguez's mother and Isabel's grandmother." She took some documents from her purse. "I have here my daughter's birth certificate, her marriage certificate to Robert, and Isabel's birth certificate." Richard examined the documents. They were original, authentic, and confirmed everything the woman was saying. "Mrs. Rodriguez, where have you been for the past 2 years? Why didn't you show up when Sylvia and Robert had the accident?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't know they had passed away. I lived in Sacramento taking care of my husband who was very sick. Sylvia and we had a bad fight 3 years ago and stopped talking to each other." "Fight about what?" "About her marriage to Robert. I thought she was too young, that she should study more before getting married. I said some terrible things to her, things that I regret to this day." Patricia wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. "My husband passed away 3 months ago. When I returned to Phoenix to take care of his pension documents, I found out what had happened." "How did you find out?" "I went to the house where Sylvia lived. The neighbors told me about the accident, about Isabel having disappeared, about all the confusion. I spent 2 months looking for her until yesterday someone told me that a girl her age was living with a businessman in the city." Richard sat down, trying to process yet another twist in Isabel's story. "Do you have any way to prove that you're really her grandmother?" "I do." Patricia took an old photo from her purse. "This is Isabel at 2 years old, on her last birthday that I attended before the fight with Sylvia." The photo clearly showed Isabel, 2 years younger but unmistakably the same child, sitting on the lap of a woman who was obviously a younger version of Patricia. "My God," murmured Richard. "Mr. Caldwell, I know that you took care of my granddaughter, that you saved her from bad people. I'm very grateful for that." Patricia leaned forward. "But now I want to take her home with me." "Home? I have a simple house in Sacramento, a pension from my husband, and all the love in the world to give to my granddaughter. She's all I have left of my family." Richard felt the world collapse around him. He had just found a reason to live, a daughter to love, a future to build. And now Isabel's biological grandmother appeared with unquestionable legal rights. "Do you intend to go to court?" "I prefer to resolve this amicably. I can see that you've become attached to the girl, and I imagine that she's also become attached to you." Patricia paused. "How about we talk to her and see what she wants?" "Mrs. Rodriguez, Isabel has been through terrible traumas in the last 2 years. She was being mistreated by a woman who forged documents claiming to be her relative. Any sudden change can be harmful. I understand. But she has the right to know her true family. At that moment, Isabel's voice came from the garden. "Mr. Richard, can I come in? I want to meet the lady." Patricia smiled for the first time since she had arrived. "Can I talk to her?" Richard nodded, even feeling his heart break. When Isabel entered the room, she stopped immediately upon seeing Patricia, as if some ancestral memory made her recognize a familiar face. "Hi," she said shyly. "Hi, my little granddaughter," replied Patricia, her voice choked with emotion. "Do you remember Grandma Patricia?" Isabel wrinkled her little forehead, concentrating. You made cornbread." "I did, your favorite." Patricia began to cry. "You remember?" "And you sang that song at bedtime," said Isabel, her memory being awakened gradually, "about the little bird that wanted to fly." "Fly, fly, the little bird wants to fly," began Patricia to sing with a trembling voice. "But her little wings still don't know how to use," completed Isabel, her eyes shining with the rediscovered memory. Richard watched the scene with a mixture of joy and despair. It was beautiful to see Isabel reconnecting with a part of her true family, but at the same time, it meant that he would probably lose her. "Grandma, where were you?" asked Isabel. "Why didn't you come get me when Mom and Dad were gone?" "Because I didn't know, honey. Grandma was very far away, taking care of Grandpa who was sick. If I had known, I would have come running to get you." Isabel looked between Patricia and Richard, clearly confused. "And now? Am I going to live with Grandma?" "What do you want, sweetie?" asked Richard, forcing himself to leave the decision with her. I don't know," said Isabel honestly. "I love you guys here, but I also want to get to know Grandma better." Patricia knelt to Isabel's height. "How about Grandma staying here a few days visiting? That way you can get to know me better and decide what you want to do." "Can you stay?" asked Isabel, looking at Richard. "Of course she can," he said, even knowing that he was prolonging his agony. The next 3 days were an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved. Patricia proved to be a gentle and loving woman who clearly adored Isabel and had a lot of pent-up love to give to her granddaughter. She told stories about Sylvia as a child, showed old family photos, and gradually reconnected Isabel with her origins. Richard watched everything with a broken heart, seeing how Isabel blossomed as she discovered more about her family history. It was impossible to deny that the girl deserved to know her roots, to have contact with someone who had loved her parents and could tell stories about them. "Mr. Richard," said Isabel on the third night, "can I talk to you?" "Of course, sweetie. I like Grandma Patricia a lot. She's kind, and she tells me things about Mom that I didn't know." "That's very good. But I don't want to leave here. This is my home now, you're my dad, and Maria is my grandma here." Isabel held his hand. "Could Grandma Patricia live here with us?" The suggestion caught Richard completely off guard. "Live here?" "Yeah. That way, I stay with everyone I love in the same place." The next morning, Richard talked to Patricia about Isabel's idea. To his surprise, the woman considered the proposal seriously. "Mr. Caldwell, can I be honest with you?" she said. "At 65 years old, raising a 6-year-old child alone would be very difficult for me, and I can see that Isabel has created deep bonds here. But she's your granddaughter, and I want the best for her. If the best for her is to stay in a family that loves her, in a house where she feels safe, then that's what I want too." Patricia paused. "But I would like to be part of her life." "How?" "How about we share custody? I could live here in Phoenix, visit Isabel regularly, participate in her education, be the grandmother she deserves to have." "Would you do that?" "I would. Because what matters isn't where Isabel lives, but whether she's loved and happy." When they presented the idea to Isabel, the girl jumped with joy. "So I'm going to have a dad, a Grandma Maria, and a Grandma Patricia, and everyone is going to live close?" Exactly, said Richard, feeling a happiness that he hadn't experienced for years. It's the best idea in the world, shouted Isabel, hugging the two of them. 2 weeks later, Patricia had moved into a small house rented 3 blocks from Richard's house. The adoption process had been reformulated to include the grandmother as part of Isabel's extended family, and lawyers from both sides worked to formalize a shared custody arrangement that met the best interests of the child. But what none of them knew was that there was still a final revelation waiting for them, a discovery that would connect all the dots of Isabel's story in a way that they could never have imagined. The final discovery happened by chance, 3 weeks after Patricia's arrival. Richard was in the office, organizing the adoption documents, when he found an old folder that he hadn't seen for years. Documents from the time when his wife Amelia had undergone fertility treatment. Amelia had always dreamed of being a mother, and for 2 years they had tried various treatments in the hope of starting a family. The last procedure had been done at a clinic in Sacramento, shortly before the accident that took her away. Richard had never revisited those papers because they were too painful, but something caught his attention. In the header of one of the documents was the name Dr. Robert Rodriguez, technician in embryology laboratory. Richard felt his heart race. Could it be the same Robert Rodriguez, Isabel's father? He immediately called the clinic, but found out that it had closed 3 years ago. He got the contact of a retired employee, Mrs. Evans, who had worked there for 15 years. Robert Rodriguez. Of course I remember him, she said when Richard called. He was a very dedicated young man, a specialist in embryology. He worked with us for 4 years before leaving to work in construction. Construction? Why did he change areas? Because the clinic was going through financial difficulties and had to lay off several employees. Robert was one of the newest, so he was one of the first to leave. Mrs. Evans paused. Why are you asking about him? It's a long story. Mrs. Evans, do you remember the cases he handled? Some, yes. He was very careful, noted everything in detail. He always said that each embryo was a future baby and deserved the utmost care. Do you remember a case involving Richard and Amelia Caldwell? Caldwell. Mrs. Evans was silent, thinking. Oh, yes. The couple who lost the baby due to complications in the pregnancy. It was a very sad case. Richard felt the world spin. What do you mean, lost the baby? The lady got pregnant after the treatment, but had complications in the 5th month. The baby was born too premature to survive. Mrs. Evans paused. Wait, didn't you know about this? My wife never told me she was pregnant. She had the accident before she could give me the news. My God, then you never knew. Mrs. Evans' voice was filled with emotion. Mr. Caldwell, your wife was pregnant when she had the accident, but the baby survived. Richard almost dropped the phone. What do you mean, survived? She was in the 5th month of pregnancy when she had the accident. The doctors managed to save the baby through an emergency C-section. A girl. She stayed in the neonatal ICU for months, but she survived. And where is that child now? I don't know. After your wife passed away, the hospital tried to contact you several times, but they never managed to. You had traveled out of the country, if I remember correctly. It was true. After Amelia's accident, Richard had fled to Europe for 3 months, unable to deal with the pain. When he returned, he immersed himself in work and avoided any contact with hospitals or memories of his wife. What happened to the baby? She was put up for adoption, but I know who handled the case. Dr. Lisa Carter. She was a neonatal pediatrician at the time. Maybe she can give you more information. Richard got Dr. Carter's contact and called immediately. When he explained who he was, the doctor was silent for a long moment. Mr. Caldwell, we looked for you for months. Your daughter was in the ICU for 4 months before being discharged. My daughter, a beautiful girl, very feisty. She was born weighing just 2 pounds, but she had an impressive will to live. The doctor paused. As we were unable to locate the father, we followed the protocol for adoption. To whom was she given? To a young couple who had been on the waiting list for years, Robert and Sylvia Rodriguez. The world stopped. Richard needed to sit down. His legs couldn't support him anymore. "Doctor, are you sure about this?" "Absolutely sure. I have here the complete file. The child was officially adopted by the Rodriguez couple when she was 6 months old. Her name," the doctor leafed through papers, "Isabel Caldwell Rodriguez." Richard began to cry, tears of shock, of joy, of pain for all the lost years. Isabel wasn't just the daughter he had chosen to adopt. She was his biological daughter, the child that Amelia had carried in her womb and that by a cruel twist of fate had ended up an orphan twice. First when she lost her biological parents, then when she lost her adoptive parents. "Doctor, where can I get the DNA tests to prove it?" "Mr. Caldwell, you don't need DNA. I have here all the original documentation. Isabel is your biological daughter, there's no doubt about it." When he hung up the phone, Richard stayed in the office for a whole hour, trying to process the revelation. All these years, he had carried the guilt for Isabel's situation, thinking that his negligence had indirectly caused the tragedy that left the girl an orphan. But in reality, Isabel was his own daughter, the child that Amelia had carried in her womb and that he had never known existed. Destiny had conspired in an extraordinary way. Robert Rodriguez, the man who had cared for Isabel as an adoptive father, was the same person who had worked on the fertility procedures that resulted in her conception. The man that Richard considered indirectly responsible for his tragedy was actually someone who had dedicated his professional life to helping couples have children, and then had adopted and loved his daughter as if she were his own. "Mr. Caldwell?" Maria's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you okay? You've been locked in here for an hour." "Maria," he said, his voice still choked, "I need to tell you something. And then we're going to tell Isabel what happened. Isabel is my biological daughter, mine and Amelia's." Maria sat down heavily in a chair. "How so?" Richard told her the whole discovery. Maria cried along with him, touched by the revelation that the girl she had learned to love was really part of the long-desired family. "How are we going to tell her?" asked Maria. "Very carefully, and we're going to tell Patricia too. She deserves to know the truth." An hour later, they were all gathered in the living room. Richard, Maria, Patricia, and Isabel. The girl was playing with a doll on the floor, oblivious to the revolution that was about to happen in her life. "Isabel," began Richard, "I need to tell you something very important." "What is it, Daddy?" The word Daddy took on a completely new meaning. "You remember that I told you that my wife, Aunt Amelia, had passed away before you were born?" "I remember. I found out today that Aunt Amelia was your real mom, your tummy mom." Isabel stopped playing and looked at him confused. "How so?" "You were born from our love, mine and Aunt Amelia's. But when you were still in her tummy, she had an accident and couldn't take care of you. So Uncle Robert and Aunt Sylvia, who couldn't have babies, adopted you and took care of you with a lot of love. So you're my real daddy too. I'm your daddy by blood and by heart." Isabel processed the information with the seriousness that small children sometimes demonstrate in the face of important revelations. "And Grandma Patricia? She's still your grandma. Uncle Robert and Aunt Sylvia were your parents too, even if they weren't by blood. And Grandma Patricia is your grandma by heart." Patricia approached Isabel. "My little granddaughter, this doesn't change anything between us. You're still my darling granddaughter." "So now I'm sure no one is going to take me away from you?" asked Isabel. "Absolutely sure," replied Richard. "Now we're a real family in every possible way." Isabel smiled, that radiant smile that lit up any room. "Then can I call you Daddy without having to explain it to anyone? You can always call me Daddy, my daughter. And Aunt Amelia was my mom." "She was, and I'm sure she would be very happy to know that you grew up strong and brave." That night, after Isabel fell asleep, Richard went to the room that had been Amelia's, a place he had avoided for 5 years. He took a picture of his wife from the drawer and looked at it for a long time. "Thank you," he whispered to the photo. "Thank you for giving me the most wonderful daughter in the world. I promised to take care of her with all the love we had to give." The story was almost complete. There was only one last chapter missing, the legal formalization of something that destiny had conspired to create, a family united by love, by loss, by hope, and finally by the truth. The months following the discovery that Isabel was his biological daughter brought a profound transformation in the lives of everyone involved. Richard dedicated himself to knowing every detail of the life that his daughter had lived without him, while Isabel blossomed with the security of finally knowing her true origin. But the legal process to formalize the situation proved more complex than anyone had imagined. The late discovery of biological paternity, combined with the previous adoption by the Rodriguezes and Valerie's fraudulent guardianship, created a legal tangle that required months of hard work. It was during one of these preliminary hearings that Sarah brought news that left Richard worried. Valerie's defense is trying to use the revelation of biological paternity to question the entire process, she explained in the office. They claim that if Isabel is your biological daughter, then you always had rights over her, and that Valerie should never have had custody. Isn't that good for our case? It should be, but they're using this argument to try to annul all the evidence we collected against her. If they can prove that the guardianship was illegitimate from the beginning, they can claim that Valerie was a victim of a system error. Richard felt a familiar anger growing. She's trying to make herself a victim. Exactly. And the worst thing is that she got a new lawyer, more experienced than the previous one. Dr. Harrison, known for getting acquittals in seemingly impossible cases. What does that mean for Isabel? It means that we may have to go to trial. And in trials, there's always the risk of unexpected results. That same week, Richard received an unexpected call that complicated the situation even further. It was from a social worker in Sacramento, informing that there were other children involved in Valerie's scheme who had not yet been located. Mr. Caldwell, during the investigations of the case, we discovered that Valerie maintained contacts with people in at least 3 states. We believe that she was part of a larger child exploitation network. And does that affect Isabel's case? It may affect it. If they prove that Valerie was just a small piece in a larger organization, they may try to transfer criminal responsibility to others involved, diminishing her guilt. Richard realized that the battle was far from over, but this time he wasn't fighting alone. Patricia had proved to be a valuable ally, using her contacts in Sacramento to get information about other similar cases. Maria had become an inexhaustible source of emotional support for Isabel, and the girl herself, now 7 years old, demonstrated a surprising maturity in dealing with the whole situation. "Daddy," said Isabel one afternoon while they were doing homework together, "why is Aunt Valerie still trying to cause problems?" "Because she doesn't want to take responsibility for the bad things she did." "But she knows she did bad things, right?" "She knows. But sometimes people prefer to blame other people instead of admitting their mistakes." Isabel thought for a moment. "When I do something wrong, you always teach me to apologize and try to fix it. Why don't adults do that?" The child's simple question deeply touched Richard. "Because not all adults have learned the lessons you're learning, my daughter. So she's like a child who never grew up, right?" "In a way, that's right. I feel sorry for her, right?" Isabel's compassion for the woman who had caused her so much suffering left Richard moved. His daughter was learning lessons about forgiveness and humanity that many adults took a lifetime to understand. The trial was scheduled for 3 months later. During that period, Sarah worked tirelessly to strengthen the case, while Richard dedicated himself to creating an environment as normal as possible for Isabel. He enrolled her in a private school in the city, where she quickly excelled both academically and socially. The teachers were impressed with her resilience and ability to learn. Isabel made friends quickly and began to participate in activities such as children's choir and swimming lessons. "It's impressive how she managed to overcome everything she lived through," commented the school psychologist during a meeting. "Children who have gone through similar traumas usually take years to be able to integrate socially in such a natural way." "She's a special girl," replied Richard, "and she was very lucky to find people who loved her unconditionally when she needed it most." "Are you referring to the Rodriguezes?" "To them too, but mainly to my housekeeper, Maria, and to her biological grandmother, Patricia, women who knew how to give love when she needed it most." 2 weeks before the trial, something unexpected happened. John, the boy who had been rescued along with the other children from the rural property, asked to speak to Richard. "Mister," he said. He had started calling Richard that after he was reintegrated into his original family. "I want to help in Aunt Valerie's trial." "Help how, John?" "By telling the truth about what she did to us. I know I'm going to have to talk in front of a lot of people, but I want her not to be able to hurt any more children." The courage of the 8-year-old boy deeply touched Richard. "Are you sure? It may be difficult." "I'm sure. Isabel was always brave when Aunt Valerie hurt us. Now it's my turn to be brave for her." On the day of the trial, the courthouse in Phoenix was crowded. The story had spread throughout the city, and many people came to show support for Richard and Isabel. The case had touched the community in a way that no one expected. Valerie arrived handcuffed, escorted by police officers. She looked thinner and aged, but her eyes still carried the same coldness that Richard remembered. She avoided looking at anyone directly, especially when Isabel entered the courtroom, accompanied by Patricia and Maria. The public prosecutor presented a solid case, with physical evidence, testimonies from several children who had been victims of Valerie, and documentation proving the fraudulent scheme of documents. Sarah had managed to gather an impressive dossier that clearly showed the systematic pattern of child exploitation. The defense lawyer, Dr. Harrison, tried several strategies. First, he claimed that Valerie was just a desperate woman trying to survive. Then, he tried to transfer the blame to the system that had failed to protect the children. Finally, he questioned the validity of some testimonies, claiming that the children had been influenced by adults. It was when John asked to testify that the course of the trial changed definitively. "Your Honor," said the boy to the judge, with an impressive seriousness for his 8 years, "no one taught me what to say here. I want to speak because I know the difference between lies and truth." "You can speak, John." "Aunt Valerie hit us when we didn't bring enough money. She left us hungry when we disobeyed, and she always said that no one would miss us if we disappeared." John looked directly at Valerie. "But she was wrong. A lot of people missed us. A lot of people really love us." John's testimony was followed by the testimonies of Michelle and other children. Each account painted a consistent picture of systematic abuse and cruel exploitation. When it was Isabel's turn to testify, she asked to speak directly to the judge. "Your Honor," she said, "I want Aunt Valerie not to be able to hurt any more children, but I also want her to learn to be a better person. My daddy taught me that everyone can change if they really want to." Isabel's statement caused a total silence in the courtroom. Even Valerie looked up to look at the girl she had tortured, and who now demonstrated a compassion that she herself seemed incapable of feeling. When the judge retired to deliberate, Richard hugged his daughter with pride. "You were very brave, my daughter." "I learned from Daddy," she replied. "You taught me that courage is doing what's right, even when it's difficult." 3 hours later, the judge returned with the verdict. Valerie was found guilty of all charges: exploitation of minors, falsification of documents, kidnapping, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. The sentence was 15 years in prison, with the possibility of parole for good behavior after serving 2/3 of the sentence. But the most significant moment came after the reading of the sentence, when Valerie asked to speak to Isabel. "Can I?" she asked the judge. Richard initially opposed, but Isabel said she wanted to hear what Valerie had to say. "Isabel," said Valerie, her voice broken for the first time, I did terrible things to you. I can't ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm going to try to use this time in prison to learn to be a better person, as you said." Isabel looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you for telling the truth, Aunt Valerie. I hope you really managed to get better." And with this final demonstration of maturity and compassion, the 7-year-old girl taught everyone present a lesson about forgiveness that few adults could give. 6 months after the trial, the life of the Caldwell family had finally found a healthy and stable routine. Isabel excelled at school, had made several friends, and demonstrated a genuine joy that contrasted completely with the frightened child that Richard had saved on the bridge months ago. But it was during a seemingly ordinary morning that Sarah called with news that would change everything once again. "Richard, I need to talk to you urgently. It's about the lawsuit against Anderson and Sons Construction. What happened? The investigation into the accident that killed Isabel's adoptive parents revealed much more than we imagined. The negligence went far beyond defective equipment." An hour later, Richard was in Sarah's office, where she presented a disturbing discovery. Anderson and Sons Construction had knowledge of the safety problems months before the accident. They received technical reports warning about the risks, but chose to ignore them to maintain the schedule of delivery of the works. Does that mean it was criminal negligence? Worse than that, we discovered that they had a specific insurance that covered work accidents, and the value of the insurance was greater than the cost of implementing the necessary safety measures. Sarah showed documents. They literally calculated that it would be more profitable to let accidents happen and collect the insurance. Richard felt a cold anger growing in his chest. They deliberately put lives at risk for money. Exactly. And there's more. The construction company was hired by you because it offered the lowest price, but it managed to get that price precisely by neglecting basic safety measures. The guilt that Richard had learned to carry multiplied. "So my choice for economy directly contributed to the deaths of Isabel's parents." "Richard, stop it. You had no way of knowing. The responsibility is entirely of the construction company." Sarah leaned forward. "But now we have the opportunity to do justice." "How?" "The district attorney is going to open a criminal case against the owners of Anderson and Sons Construction, and civilly you can sue for moral and material damages. The amount of compensation would be enough to guarantee Isabel's future until she graduates from college." Richard remained silent for a long moment. The idea of profiting financially from the tragedy that had destroyed Isabel's family deeply disturbed him. "Sarah, any money that comes from this process will go directly to an educational fund for Isabel. I don't want to touch a penny. It's a noble decision. But Richard, there's something else you need to know." "What?" "During the investigation, we discovered that Robert Rodriguez had documented all the irregularities he observed on the construction site. He was preparing a formal complaint against the construction company when he had the accident." "A complaint?" "He had photographs of the defective equipment, copies of reports that were ignored, evidence that the engineers in charge knew the risks." Sarah took a folder from the drawer. "We found all of this in his personal belongings, which had been stored in a storage facility since the accident." Richard examined the photos and documents. They were devastating evidence of the construction company's criminal negligence. Why didn't he report it before? Because he was gathering enough evidence to ensure that the complaint would result in effective action. Robert was meticulous. He wanted to make sure that no one could cover up the case. And Sylvia knew about this. She knew. In fact, she was the one who guided Robert to document everything before making the complaint. As an occupational safety technician, she knew exactly what kind of evidence would be needed. The revelation brought a new dimension to the tragedy. Robert and Sylvia weren't just victims of an accident. They were silenced before they could expose the corruption that cost their lives. Sarah, I want you to use this evidence in the criminal case. I want those responsible to pay for what they did. We're already working on it. The district attorney said that with this evidence, it's almost certain that we'll get criminal convictions. That night, Richard talked to Patricia about the discoveries. Isabel's grandmother was touched to learn that her daughter and son-in-law had died trying to protect other workers. I always knew my Sylvia was brave, she said, tears in her eyes. And Robert was an honest man. It makes sense that they tried to do the right thing. Patricia, there's something I want to propose. What? When the lawsuit against the construction company is resolved, I want to use part of the compensation to create an occupational safety institute in Robert and Sylvia's name, something that prevents other workers from going through what they went through. Patricia held Richard's hands. They would be proud of that. And I want Isabel to participate in the decision when she's older. It's her future that's being decided. 2 months later, the criminal case against Anderson and Sons Construction resulted in the imprisonment of 3 executives of the company and the payment of substantial compensation to the families of all victims of work accidents related to the construction company's negligence. Richard kept his promise not to touch the compensation money. Everything was deposited in an educational fund for Isabel, administered by a bank with the supervision of Patricia and Sarah. But the true transformation came when he decided to tell Isabel, now 8 years old, the whole truth about her adoptive parents. "Daddy," she said after hearing the whole story, "so Uncle Robert and Aunt Sylvia were heroes?" "They were, yes. They died trying to protect other people. And they loved me even though I wasn't their tummy daughter. They loved you as if you were the most precious thing in the world." Isabel was thoughtful for a moment. "Can I visit where they are buried?" "Of course you can." The following Saturday, the whole family went to the cemetery where Robert and Sylvia were buried. Isabel brought flowers that she herself had grown in the garden, white daisies, Sylvia's favorites, according to Patricia. "Hi, Daddy Robert." "Hi, Mom Sylvia," she said, placing the flowers on the graves. "I wanted to say thank you for taking care of me when I was little. And I wanted to tell you that now I'm fine, that I have a big family that loves me very much." Patricia and Maria cried discreetly, while Richard fought against the emotion of seeing his daughter honoring the memory of the people who had raised her with so much love. "Daddy Robert, Mom Sylvia," continued Isabel, "I promise that I'm going to study hard and be a good person the way you wanted. And when I grow up, I'm going to help other children who need a family just like you helped me." That same week, Isabel made a request that surprised everyone. "Daddy, can I have a little sister?" "A little sister?" "Yeah. At school, the teacher said that there are a lot of children who need a family. How about we adopt one?" Richard looked at Maria and Patricia, who smiled encouragingly. "Are you sure about this, my daughter?" "I am. That way she'll have the same luck that I had, finding a family that really loves. What if the child has come from difficult situations like you? Even better, because I'll be able to teach her that even when things are bad, they can always get better. I'm proof of that." Isabel's wisdom and generosity deeply touched Richard. At 8 years old, his daughter already demonstrated an understanding of love and family that many adults took decades to develop. "Okay," he said, "we're going to talk to social workers about adoption." "Really?" shouted Isabel, jumping with joy. "Really? But it's going to take time, and we have to make sure that we're prepared to give a new child all the love and care she deserves." "I'm already prepared. I'm going to teach her how to take care of the plants, how to make cookies with Grandma Maria, how to listen to Grandma Patricia's stories." Seeing Isabel's enthusiasm, Richard realized that his daughter had learned the most important lesson of all. that love multiplies when it's shared. 3 months later, they were on the waiting list for adoption, specifically for children who had gone through traumas similar to Isabel's. The Caldwell family was ready to grow again, this time in a planned way, and with all the experience they had accumulated in their journey of healing and discovery. The girl who had been saved on the bridge was now ready to save other children, not through physical rescue, but through the transformative power of a true family. A year had passed since the Caldwell family had registered on the adoption list, and during that time, Isabel had matured in an impressive way. At 9 years old, she demonstrated an empathy and wisdom that frequently surprised the adults around her. Richard had used this period to further strengthen family bonds and prepare the house to receive a new child. It was on a Thursday morning that Patrice Johnson, now working as a social worker specializing in complex adoptions, called with a proposal that would test all the values that the family had built. "Richard, there's a case that may interest you. It's delicate, but I believe that your family has exactly the necessary profile. Can you tell me about it? It's a 5-year-old girl named Lily. She has spent the last 2 years in a situation very similar to the one that Isabel lived through. She was rescued 6 months ago from a house where she was forced to work on the streets." Richard's heart tightened. "And what is her situation now?" "She's in a temporary foster home, but she's having a lot of difficulty adapting. She has already been through 3 different families, but she always ends up being returned because the adoptive parents can't cope with her traumas." "What kind of difficulties?" "Constant nightmares, panic attacks, refusal to eat, aggressive behavior when she feels threatened. She's a very wounded child." Patrice paused. "But I believe that Isabel, having gone through similar experiences, could be fundamental to helping in her adaptation." Richard talked to Maria, Patricia, and mainly with Isabel about the proposal. His daughter's reaction was immediate and determined. "Daddy, we have to help her. I know what it's like to feel scared all the time. If no one helped me, I would still be scared." "My daughter taking care of a traumatized child isn't easy. It may take a long time for her to trust us. She may have behaviors that will scare you. It doesn't matter. When I got here, I also had strange behaviors. Remember that I hid food under the bed because I was afraid of being hungry." It was true. Isabel had taken months to overcome some behaviors developed during the period with Valerie. "What if she doesn't like you? Then I'm going to be patient until she learns that she can like me. Just like you guys were patient with me." A week later, they went to meet Lily at the foster home. The girl was small for her 5 years, too skinny, with disheveled brown hair and eyes that carried a deep sadness that Richard recognized immediately. They were the same eyes that Isabel had when he saved her on the bridge. "Hi, Lily," said Isabel softly, crouching down to the girl's height. "My name is Isabel. I came to meet you." Lily hid behind one of the caregivers, watching Isabel with distrust. "Are you afraid of me?" asked Isabel. "It's okay to be afraid. When I was your age, I was also afraid of new people." "Why?" asked Lily in an almost inaudible voice. "Because bad people had hurt me, and I thought that all people were going to hurt me too." "And didn't they hurt you?" "No. In fact, I found people who protected me and taught me that the world can be safe." Isabel pointed to Richard. "This is my daddy. He saved me when I was in danger." Lily looked at Richard with cautious curiosity. "Is he good?" "He's the best daddy in the world. And this is Grandma Maria," said Isabel, introducing the housekeeper. "She makes the best cookies and always tells stories at bedtime. And this is Grandma Patricia," she continued, introducing the grandmother. "She knows all the songs in the world and plants the most beautiful flowers." During the visit, Isabel was patient and caring with Lily, not forcing approach, but making it clear that she was available whenever the younger girl wanted to talk. It was an impressive contrast to see the 9-year-old child demonstrating an emotional maturity that many adults didn't possess. "Lily," said Isabel at the end of the visit, "if you want, you can come live in our house." We have a very nice room, a garden full of flowers, and a lot of people who are going to take care of you." "What if I wet the bed?" asked Lily, clearly embarrassed. "It's okay. I also did it when I had nightmares. Grandma Maria always changed the sheets without getting angry. What if I cry at night? Then someone is going to stay with you until you stop crying. They always stayed with me. What if I break something? We'll fix it. The important thing is for you to be safe and happy." 2 weeks later, Lily arrived at the Caldwell's house carrying only a small backpack with some clothes and a very battered teddy bear. She was visibly nervous, clinging to Patrice's hand as if it were her only safety. "Welcome to our home, Lily," said Richard, crouching down to her height. "We're very happy that you decided to come live with us." Lily didn't answer. She just nodded shyly. "Do you want to see your room?" asked Isabel. "I helped decorate it thinking about you." The room that they had prepared for Lily was cozy, with walls painted in light yellow, a small bed with a floral bedspread, and shelves with children's books and some toys. "Is it all mine?" asked Lily, clearly impressed. "It's all yours, and if you want to change something you can tell us and we'll fix it the way you like." The first days were challenging. Lily had nightmares every night, waking up screaming and taking several minutes to calm down. She refused to eat at the table with the family, preferring to have her meals alone in her room, and she demonstrated a defensive behavior whenever someone approached too quickly. But Isabel proved to be an exceptional older sister. Every night, when Lily woke up with nightmares, Isabel went to her room and stayed humming softly until the girl fell back asleep. During the day, she respected Lily's space, but always made it clear that she was available. "Why doesn't she want to play with me?" asked Isabel to Richard one afternoon, after Lily had refused an invitation to play in the garden. "Because she hasn't learned yet that playing can be safe. Remember what you were like in the beginning." "I remember. I was afraid even to laugh too loud because I thought someone was going to get mad at me." "Exactly. Lily is going to need time to learn that here she can be a real child." It was at the end of the second week that the first significant breakthrough happened. Lily was in the garden watching Isabel take care of the flowers when she decided to approach. "Can I help?" she asked shyly. "Of course," replied Isabel, excited but controlling her enthusiasm not to scare her sister. "I'm going to teach you how to water without soaking the roots." For an hour, the two girls worked side by side in the garden. Lily asked questions about the plants, and Isabel answered patiently, sharing everything she had learned with Maria and Patricia. "Isabel," said Lily suddenly, "thank you for not giving up on me." "Why would I give up?" "Because the other families gave up. They said I was too difficult." Isabel stopped watering the plants and looked directly at Lily. "Lily, can I tell you a secret?" "You can. In the beginning, I also thought that my daddy was going to give up on me because I wet the bed. I woke up screaming. I was afraid of everything." Isabel sat on the grass next to her sister. "But do you know what I learned?" "What?" "That real family doesn't give up. Real family is patient and stays on our side, even when we're difficult. And you guys are my real family." "We are. And we're always going to be, no matter what happens." That night, for the first time since she had arrived, Lily asked to have dinner at the table with the family. She still ate little and remained silent for most of the time, but it was an important step. "Daddy," said Isabel before going to sleep, "I think Lily is starting to understand that here it's safe. And that's thanks mainly to you, my daughter. You're being the most wonderful sister she could have. I learned from you guys. You taught me how to love someone who's hurt inside." That night, Richard reflected on the extraordinary journey that his family had traveled. It had started as a lonely man who saved a child on a bridge, and now he was a father of two girls who were learning from each other the most important lessons about love, family, and healing. Letitia's adaptation process would still be a long one, but Richard knew his family was prepared to face any challenge. After all, they had already proven that true love can overcome any trauma and transform any pain into hope. 2 years had passed since Letitia's arrival, and the transformation in the girl was truly miraculous. At 7 years old, she'd become a cheerful, curious, and affectionate child who ran around the house filling it with laughter and typical childhood antics. Isadora, now 11 years old, had become not only an exemplary older sister, but also a young woman with an emotional wisdom that impressed everyone. It was on a Saturday morning, while the whole family was having breakfast in the garden, a tradition they had created for weekends, that a letter arrived that would change their lives one last time. "Daddy, there's a letter for you," said Letitia, handing over the envelope she had retrieved from the mailbox. "It's from a place called the Phoenix Women's Penitentiary." Richard felt his stomach churn. He knew exactly who had sent that letter. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and read it in silence. His expressions changed several times during the reading, first tension, then surprise, and finally something that seemed to be relief, mixed with compassion. "What is it, Daddy?" asked Isadora, noticing his reaction. "It's a letter from Valerie," he said, folding the paper carefully. Maria stopped serving juice. Patrice let out a worried sigh, and the two girls fell silent. Valerie's name was not mentioned frequently in the house, but everyone knew who she was and what she represented in Isadora's past. "What does she want?" asked Patrice cautiously. Richard took a deep breath. "She wants to apologize, to Isadora and to our family." "Apologize?" asked Letitia, confused. "Who is Valerie?" Isadora held her younger sister's hand. "She's someone who hurt me a lot before I came to live here. She's in prison now. And she wants to apologize?" "It seems so," Richard replied. "In the letter, she says she has spent these 2 years doing therapy and participating in rehabilitation programs in prison. She says she understands now the harm she caused and would like to have the opportunity to apologize in person." Maria spoke up. "Mr. Caldwell, you're not thinking about accepting this, are you? It could be a trap." "I don't think it is, Maria. The letter is very different. It seems genuine." Richard looked at Isadora. "But the decision is not mine. It's Isadora's." All eyes turned to the 11-year-old girl, who remained thoughtful for several minutes. "Can I read the letter?" she asked finally. Richard hesitated. "Are you sure? It might bring back bad memories." "I'm sure. If she wants to apologize to me, I need to know what she has to say." Isadora read the letter in silence, her expression remaining serene throughout the reading. When she finished, she looked at the family gathered around her. "She really seems sorry," she said. "She says in therapy she discovered that she was mistreated when she was a child too, and that's why she thought mistreating children was normal. She says she's learned that that's not an excuse, but that it explains why she became a bad person." "And what do you want to do?" asked Richard. "I want to go visit her." "Isadora!" exclaimed Maria. "Are you sure? You don't have to do this." "I know I don't have to, but I want to." Isadora looked at Letitia. "Remember when you came here and were very scared and angry, and how important it was to you that I was patient and didn't give up on you?" "I remember," replied Letitia. "Maybe Valerie needs the same thing. Maybe she needs someone she hurt to show that it is possible to change and be forgiven." Patrice wiped a tear from her eyes. "My little granddaughter, you have a heart bigger than the world. I learned from you that forgiving is not forgetting what happened. It's choosing not to let anger ruin our happiness." A week later, Richard, Isadora, and Aparecida, who insisted on going, were in the visiting room of the women's penitentiary. Valerie arrived accompanied by a correctional officer, and the transformation in her was impressive. The woman who entered the room bore little resemblance to the Valerie that Richard remembered. Her hair was clean and tidy. She had gained healthy weight, but mainly her eyes no longer carried that cruel coldness that he remembered. Instead, there was a deep sadness and what seemed to be genuine remorse. "Isadora," said Valerie, her voice choked with emotion as soon as she saw the girl. "You've grown so much." "Hi, Valerie," replied Isadora calmly, without anger, but also without affection. Can I sit down?" asked Valerie, clearly nervous. "You can." Valerie sat in the chair in front of Isadora, but maintained a respectful distance. "I don't even know where to start," she said. "I did such terrible things to you. To all the children." "You can start by explaining why you did those things," said Isadora, with impressive maturity. "During these 2 years in prison, I did a lot of therapy. I discovered that when I was a child, I was mistreated too. My parents beat me, left me hungry, forced me to work." Valerie wiped her eyes. "But that doesn't justify anything. I chose to do to other children what was done to me, and that was wrong. Why did you choose to do that?" "Because it was easier to be cruel than to learn to be kind. Because I thought the world was like that. The strong hurt the weak." Valerie looked directly at Isadora. "But you showed me I was wrong." "How?" "On the day of the trial, when you said you hoped I would learn to be a better person. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. With hope instead of hate." Isadora remained silent for a moment. "And have you learned?" "I'm learning every day. I do therapy, participate in support groups, read books about how to care for children instead of hurting them." Valerie took a deep breath. "And mainly, every day I think about you and the other children, and I promise myself that I will use the rest of my life to make up for the harm I did." Aparecida spoke up. "And why should we believe that you really changed?" "Because you don't have to believe," Valerie replied humbly. "I need to prove it through my actions. That's why I'm not asking for forgiveness expecting to receive it. I'm asking for forgiveness because it's what I must do, regardless of your answer." Isadora studied Valerie for a long moment. "Valerie, I forgive you." The simple words made Valerie burst into tears. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for giving me this, even though I don't deserve it." "Everyone deserves a second chance if they really want to change," said Isadora. "But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, nor does it mean that now we are friends." "I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm so sorry, really sorry." "I know, and I hope you continue to strive to be a better person." When they left the prison, Aparecida hugged Isadora tightly. "My little granddaughter, I am so proud of you." "Why, Grandma?" "Because you did today one of the most difficult things that exist. You forgave someone who hurt you a lot. That shows that you have a truly special heart. I learned that holding on to anger only hurts us. I prefer to use my heart to love my family and help other people." 3 months later, the Caldwell family received another unexpected visit. It was Patrice Johnson, accompanied by a boy of about 8 years old who seemed scared and suspicious. "Richard, Isadora, Letitia," said Patrice, "I want to introduce you to Peter. He went through a very similar situation to you two girls, and I thought maybe—" "He can stay," interrupted Letitia, even before Patrice finished the sentence. "We know how to help." Isadora approached the boy with the same kindness she had shown with Letitia years before. "Hi, Peter, I'm Isadora, this is my sister Letitia, and this is our dad Richard." Peter didn't answer. He just hid behind Patrice. "Are you scared?" asked Letitia. "When I arrived here, I was too, but now I'm the happiest girl in the world." "That's true," confirmed Isadora. "Here you will be safe, and we will have all the patience in the world until you learn that you can trust us." Richard watched his 2 daughters, one biological and one adoptive, preparing to receive another wounded child with all the love and wisdom they had accumulated. He thought about how his life had changed since that morning on the bridge 4 years ago. It had started as a lonely man who saved a child. Now he was the father of a family that was dedicated to saving children, not just taking them out of dangerous situations, but teaching them to love and be loved again. "Okay," he said to Patrice. "Let's talk about the procedures for receiving Peter." "Really?" asked Peter in a timid little voice, looking at Richard with a mixture of hope and fear. "Really," replied Richard, kneeling down to the boy's height. "And welcome to the family, Peter." And so, in the yellow house surrounded by flower gardens, where once lived only a lonely man, now thrived a family built not by accident or convention, but by conscious choices of love, forgiveness, and dedication to the well-being of children who needed a second chance in life. Isadora had found not only a family, but a purpose, to use her own experience of overcoming to help other children discover that it is always possible to start over. It is always possible to heal the wounds of the past, and it is always possible to transform pain into love. The girl who was once saved on a bridge had become herself a savior, not through dramatic gestures, but through the silent and transformative force of true love, infinite patience, and the unwavering belief that every child deserves to be loved unconditionally. At the Green River Bridge, where it all began, there was now a small plaque that read, "In memory of all the children who needed to be saved, and in honor of all the families who chose to love." It was the legacy of a story that proved that the most beautiful endings begin in the most difficult moments, and that true love can transform any tragedy into hope.